People are feeling overburdened, overtaxed. They're not happy with the state of our education system. And now he's like, I want billions more. I'd support an income tax to pay for it. This segment is brought to you by Eastside Weight Loss Clinic. I'm down 37 pounds on the program, and I lost most of that in just 2 months. Do what I did and what so many other undivided viewers have done. Schedule your free 15-minute consultation today at eastsideweightlossclinic.com. Superintendent of Public Instruction Kruse Reykdal, he's a month out, roughly a month from ballots going out, right, from his re-election campaign. So he's a 2-term head of our state's public school system, and he did not perform well in the primary election, not in the slightest. So he's certainly vulnerable, which is why I found it fascinating that he comes out, again, a month before ballots, not even a month before ballots arrive, and says that he would support a state income tax to help pay for education. And I'm thinking, is there anything more unpopular in the state of Washington than a state income tax? And not to mention that it's against the state constitution, so you couldn't do it anyway. It would have to be approved by voters, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so he comes out, he's got this new funding proposal, and he says, look, I need a lot of money. And if I don't get a lot of money, then educational outcomes are just not going to be there. Here's part of his ask.
I need $4 billion to get schools to the national average. I need $4 billion to get us to Massachusetts levels. I need more than $4 billion to get us to 50%. That's not what we're asking for here. We're asking for less than that, sensitive to the fact that the legislature doesn't have that all at once. And even with what we're requesting, $2.9 billion in the first biennium, $4.9 billion in the second biennium, that's going to be a challenge. And I recognize that. I am grateful always to our lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. It is a brutal time to serve. But you do it because you know you can have impact, and the consequences could not be greater than they are today.
So he says he needs $4 billion to get us up to Massachusetts levels, to get us up. Well, this is wild to me. So first of all, we'll get into his ask and who he thinks should pay for all this. He wants $2.9 billion in additional dollars for the 2025-2027 education budget in the state of Washington. First of all, we've talked repeatedly about how test scores are in the toilet and enrollment is declining. Yet Kruse Reykdal doesn't want to address any of those things. The Seattle Times, don't take that from me, the Seattle Times said it. The Seattle Times said he doesn't like to take accountability. That's why they didn't endorse him before the primary. They endorsed one of his opponents. And he never wants to admit or acknowledge some of what's happening with the focus on political and social issues as you have, failing grades for the state in the area of English language learning, math, and science. So failing grades because of that, I think declining enrollment, more parents saying, I'm done with the public schools. I'm going to homeschool my kids, or I'm going to come out of pocket for the cost of a private school. And this guy has the audacity, after not taking accountability or responsibility for the decline of our education system and the state it's in, saying, hey, you got to give me more money. We need not just more money. He says $4 billion, but he's like, that's not realistic. So $2.9 billion. Oh, and by the way, I think that we need to raise taxes in order to pay for it. And he says that first and foremost, it starts with the rich paying more.
As a constitutional officer, my job is to submit a budget. The state law doesn't say revenue, but I've never shied away from that. In prior budget requests, I offered up capital gains before it became the law. As a legislator, I offered up tax on profits instead of gross receipts for businesses to help small businesses. I'll be there for every conversation of revenue. I do think we need to change the equation in Washington state, decrease our dependence on property taxes and sales tax, and increase our concept of drawing dollars out of those who have the most. That can come in the form of capital gains, that can come in the form of income, a profit. You could even make progressive sales taxes.
Income profit, which is just an interesting phrase. So rich need to pay for this. Rich need to pay more, ignore the fact that the way that I'm running the public school system and have been running it for the past 8 years isn't successful. Test scores are down, enrollment's down. We just need the rich to throw more money at this problem. More on capital gains in a moment. But he said unequivocally, forget capital gains and the rich paying their fair share. He wants everyone paying more for education through an income tax.
Would you support an income tax to fix this problem?
I have always supported that, provided that the voters get a chance, and they always would, because we have constitutional limits on that. It's considered property right now under the law, so I've always supported that if the voters get a choice.
Yeah. But anyway, so focus back on capital gains. So he's a liberal, right? So he's a progressive. So he supports an income tax. It's just fascinating to me that he'd come out and reiterate that and reinforce that leading up to an election where a lot of taxes are on the ballot. There's an opportunity to repeal taxes. People are feeling overburdened, overtaxed. They're not happy with the state of our education system. And now he's like, I want billions more. I'd support an income tax to pay for it. And then he gets into that issue of capital gains, which, of course, one of the initiatives on the ballot in November is an initiative that would allow you to repeal the capital gains tax, which is just an unconstitutional income tax. They say, well, it's just the wealthy. Only the most wealthy people are paying this, but we know that if it's not repealed, they're going to continue to lower the threshold until all of us are paying it, and until all of us are paying it when we sell our primary home. So he said, he's acting like he's not taking a position on these things. He comes out, says, I need more money, basically don't repeal capital gains in so many words.
We have a big contemplation in front of us this year on the ballot. I encourage everyone to do your own research and vote your own conscience on those. But there's a revenue question or 2 or 3 or 4 already on the ballot. And it's important that people think about that and then think beyond that on what we could do to change from a state that taxes its lowest income consumers or families at 3 and 4 times the rate of our wealthiest. This is the reason we have perpetual budget challenges. And I think it's time to introduce this question of revenue as a daily conversation in our politics and in our budget considerations.
Yeah, but also, no mention, no conversation of how are we spending the money that we already have? Are we spending it to good effect? Are we being responsible budgeters? He doesn't want to call out the party that's been in power for 40 years in Olympia on the fact that every single time they get any ounce of new revenue, they immediately push it out and spend it on other things. They have no semblance of idea about saving and budgeting and not having this ballooning budget where any sort of dip in revenue is this crisis situation for the services that we have. So anyway, he wants an additional $2.9 billion in increased spending for 2025 to 2027. He says that he would spend that on funding for special education, which is a bipartisan agreement that we need more money in special education. But his opponent, David Olson, says we have the money to be able to pay for that. We just need to decide where we're putting the funds we already have. So he wants that additional money, funding for special education, transportation, materials, supplies, operating costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the reasons this shocks me is the timing of it. I know that he would take all the money that taxpayers are willing to give him, but he has to understand that people are feeling so I kind of love this, frankly, because he has to understand people are feeling so overtaxed, yet he's going to them like groveling despite low test scores and all of these things and declining enrollment for more money in the form of additional taxes less than a month before people get their ballots. I don't know who advised him to do that. That's a really terrible election strategy, but he did it anyway. So fine. I think that helps David Olson. To me, and I asked this in our daily subscriber show poll, which I'll get to later on, about, are you willing to pay more in taxes if we need it for education? So we'll see what you guys had to say about this. But it kind of reminds me of what's been going on in these public school districts with the need to close schools. So declining enrollment, it really sped up during the pandemic, but it hasn't let up with the number of parents taking their kids to private school or doing homeschooling or some sort of alternative school, and I think it's because some parents realized, one, what was happening with their kids in the public school system during the pandemic, because their kids were learning at their kitchen table via a computer screen, and they heard and saw some of the lesson plans and what was going on. They're like, I don't want you in that school. So they took them out and they homeschooled them. And then some parents just realized during the pandemic, hey, this is feasible for me. I had to pick up a lot of the slack for the public education system during the pandemic. So I'm going to teach my kids at home. And then you've got parents taking out kids for social and political indoctrination issues. But it's this pattern. And I think what Chris Reykdal said about what he wants, despite how bad he's doing in the public education system, is like, still give me more money.